Welcome to the very first episode of Tractor Stats. This is my 1957 John Deere 520. I featured this tractor in my other series, Tractor Stories, and told the story of this tractor, but today we're going to dive a little deeper into seeing what makes this Johnny Popper pop. This happens to be a 1957, but these tractors were made from 1956 to 1958 in Waterloo, Iowa. There were 13,048 of these tractors built. Of that, most of them being gas, 12,040 gas, and 764 of them being LP and all fuel, which is a lower quality, cheaper fuel back then that they used to use. Well, they only made 244 of those. You may have never heard of a 520, but you almost definitely have probably heard of a John Deere B. Well, first they had what we call the early John Deere B, the unstyled 4-speed Bs. Then later they went to the styled B, meaning it had the front sheet metal, and they called that a styled tractor. You can't see the radiator. And this also had this flywheel cover. Then after the late B came the 50. After the 50, that was replaced with, can you guess it? The 520. So to put it in layman's terms, a 520 is just really an updated B. After the 520 came the 530, and that was the last successor of the B and the last two-cylinder tractor in this size. The 520 is powered by a 189.8 cubic inch, or for the metric audience, a 3.1 liter two-cylinder engine, horizontal. What's interesting about this engine is that the maximum RPM rating is only 1,325 RPM. But this engine didn't really make a whole lot of horsepower, would say. The gas model made 37 belt horsepower. There's our belt pulley. And it made 33 to the drawbar. But what this engine really did well on is low RPM torque, because it really had a lot of low end torque at that only 1,325 RPM. And I'd call it fairly fuel efficient. At max belt horsepower in the Nebraska test, when they pulled it at its max horsepower on the belt, it only used 3.3 gallons per hour of gas. And when they did the drawbar pull, it was able to pull 4,723 pounds. The cylinder bore on this engine is 4 11/16, and the stroke is 5.5. with a 7-to-1 compression ratio. As we walk around the tractor, you'll see it has an alternator, GM alternator on it. That wouldn't have been factory. Factory, it would have been 6-volt with a generator. Interesting thing about these two-cylinder John Deeres is that the belt pulley also doubles as a clutch. There's the clutch lever. When you run the clutch lever, it engages this belt pulley. This is a brake for the belt pulley. So if you want to stop it to engage it into a gear, you can stop the belt pulley to get it in gear so it doesn't freewheel. What's really nice about these two-cylinder John Deere tractors is that instead of the power being transmitted through a clutch behind the engine and a drive shaft through the transmission, everything stays, say, horizontal. It goes gear to gear to gear to gear. And what's nice about this is, rather than have to split the tractor, if this would ever need a clutch, I could pop this cover off and the clutch goes right in here. Clutch job is really nothing on one of these hand clutch tractors. We have 2 manual brakes. These are just manual drums. They go on the pinion gear. These are bull gear tractors, unlike the newer 4010s, 4020s, 3010s, 3020s. They went to a planetary set. This is the old bull and pinion gear set. And as you'll notice, we walk around the tractor. It's category 2 3-point hitch. It's got 1 remote hydraulics. Let me talk about that hydraulics for a minute. This is power control. And where a lot of people mess up with these old tractors is these tractors do not run on hydraulic oil for the hydraulics. They run on 30-weight motor oil. So as we look at our controls, here's our 3-point hitch and here's our hydraulics. One nice addition to this tractor in the 20 series over the 50 is in a 50 you had only 1 lever, and when you hooked in your hydraulics, when you pushed in the hoses, it changed it, and essentially you could either run hydraulics or 3-point. You couldn't run both at the same time. This tractor, they've separated it, so you can run hydraulics or your 3-point. Let me show you a little bit more on the operator station. Even back in the 50s, John Deere had live power PTO. This is your PTO. Let me show you how that works. So the PTO is off right now. Take your foot and engage the PTO, and then step down here if you want to disengage it. Transmission. It had a 6-speed unsynchronized transmission. 1, 2, 4, 3, my hand's in the way, 5, 6. Now, do you remember, if you watched my synchro range video, how a 8-speed synchro is really just a 4-speed with a 2-speed in front of it? That's what we're seeing here. This 6-speed John Deere transmission is a 3-speed, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. So you have your 3 speeds in low range, and you have your 3 speeds in high range. So when I come over here, this movement right here, I just went from low to high, high to low. So first gear is the same gear that gets used in third gear in high range. Kind of interesting. Why make more gears when you can just double them up with another gear set? Would be kind of neat if it was done different, where you could cut this out and get a third gear reverse, wouldn't it? But it's good enough. Our dash, not bad for 1957. We had our water temperature, amp meter, oil pressure, fuel gauge, which doesn't work, and good luck finding one that works, and our tack. Didn't have a key on these tractors. I guess either nobody stole anything, or if they did, they fiddled around and found out. But there's no key. It's just an on and off switch. So on, lights, field lights is what that is. Brights going down the road, and dims. Speaking of the lights, these lights aren't really correct. See how they're sitting on top of a post on top of this bar? The correct lights, this would have been turned and the light would have faced into the bar. But this is how it was when we got it, so it's fine. While we're on the transmission, I want to note that these aren't the fastest tractors. The max speed in 6th gear is about 10 miles an hour, and the slowest speed in 1st gear is about 1.5 miles an hour. So that's the range of speeds, 1.5 to 10 miles per hour. Definitely not going to win much of a race. Also, unlike the next generation tractors, the 4010s, the 4020s, those have engine oil, and then the transmission and hydraulics are together. These tractors, you've got your engine oil, you've got your transmission oil, which is heavyweight oil, and then on the rear, that's the power control, that's the 30-weight motor oil. So they've got different compartments for this tractor on oil. For the seat, they had a pretty nice seat suspension back in '57. They used these torsion rubbers. So it was attached here, and then these arms would try to twist down, and these rubbers would torsion. And you know, for 57, that was a pretty good suspension. Of course, being a row crop tractor, we've got our adjustable axle. They use that for a long time with the keyway. And then the kind of rack and pinion grooves on the other side. John Deere, I think, still does that pretty much the same as they did back then. And then you could also move it with your double wheels. You know, you could put this on the outside. A lot of options on these row crop tractors. While we're talking about the wheels and tires, let's talk about the front ends. I'd say this is the most common front end, the old Roll-O-Matic. Essentially, those wheels are hooked to one another in there with gears, and when this wheel is forced up, this wheel gets forced down and vice versa. So essentially, if this wheel goes up 6 inches, then the tractor only goes up 3 inches. And it makes a huge difference if you're on plowed ground. This tractor actually handles pretty dang good. They had the Roll-O-Matic. They had the single front, like a motorcycle or something like that, where it just had a kind of a U-shape and a single tire. I believe the solid fronts were still available. No Roll-O-Matic, 2 tires, but just solid. And then lastly, they had the wide front end. You can tell the factory John Deere wide front end because they were square cast centerpiece. A lot of these got aftermarket Schwartz front ends, but the John Deere cast ones, you can tell by the square cast piece. Speaking of steering the front end, that makes a huge difference when you're spending all day on a tractor, that power steering. And the power steering assemblies under this front nose cone. Oil bath air cleaner, still. Even some of the 20 series had oil bath air cleaners. 2-barrel carburetor. And this is kind of nice that these were adjustable. See how it says hot? If you were living in a really cold climate, you could turn that. The other side says cold. And what it would do is it would take some of this heat off of the exhaust and it would run it through the intake to preheat the air going into the engine. If you were in Minnesota or Canada, that was probably a pretty good option. One interesting thing about the John Deeres of this era is the fuel bowl. It's actually a safety mechanism. So there's a line running up to the oil pressure gauge, and that gauge gets oil pressure and actually pushes down a diaphragm in here, allowing fuel. The great thing about that is that if this tractor would go low on oil pressure, it would shut the gas off to it. So it's kind of a neat little thing. The problem with it is, I've had it happen twice since I've owned this tractor, the diaphragms in there get bad, and then gas is actually able to come out of the gas tank and into the crankcase. So, if you have a 520 that's been sitting for a while, be sure and pull that dipstick before you start them, because you never know, it could be full of gas. While I'm on this side, here's your hydraulic pump right here, and there's a little handle where you can turn the hydraulic pump on and off. And here's the other side. I didn't cover the choke earlier, but you know, ignition, choke. I don't know, the hand clutch, if I was spending all day in the field with it, it probably wouldn't bother me at all. This tractor isn't very handy for stuff, intricate stuff. Can't talk today, it's about 95 out here. For intricate stuff where you're trying to work the clutch and the 3-point or the hydraulics at the same time, your hands get pretty full on one of these tractors. But you got to keep in mind, 1957, at the same time as this tractor was new, they were designing the 4010, 3010, and I would have liked to seen that, because can you imagine, look at this tractor compared to a 3010. Maybe I'll do a video on that. Maybe I'll bring this tractor out in the 3020 and we'll park them side by side and see what less than a decade does. But they were working on the 10 series at the time this tractor was made. I think they worked on it for about 7 years, 8 years. And this was a 1957 model, and just 3 short years later, they had the 10 series, which completely stood farming on its head and just changed that forever. I imagine International Analysis was kind of didn't know what to think about that. They probably had to go back to the drawing board. And well, of course, that's why you see the 806, 706. But the 30 series, I'd like to have a 30 series because instead of having the shaft coming through here, they had hydraulics, ran it through a hydraulic system and had hoses running up, so you have a nice clean hood and then a tilt wheel, kind of like a 10 series would be. And you can tell them by, instead of having this yellow stripe, that this little green stripe coming into it, they're more of an angle yellow all the way down. But that's enough of me rambling on. There's probably a lot more stuff to tell you about this tractor, a lot more stats, but that's pretty much the ins and outs of it. I did forget to tell you about the dimensions of it. It's 132.75 long. The wheelbase is 90 inches from center to center, front to rear wheelbase 90 inches. And the weight on this thing shows 4,960 pounds non-ballasted and 6,600 pounds ballasted. The actual weight, I've weighed this because we used to pull it. And this tractor, as it's sitting here right now, wheel weights on it and 3-point stuff, weighs right around 5,400 pounds. But I really appreciate you joining me for this new series, Tractor Stats. I think it's going to be pretty fun. I'm going to next do the 3020, the 4320, and the 4440, just like I did on Tractor Stories. And if you have a tractor you want me to do the stats on, please leave in the comments. Let me know. I'll try to do a video on it. I appreciate you staying to the end. If you've got time, watch another video. If you don't mind, hit that subscribe button and maybe even give us a like and give me some feedback. Leave us a comment. I sure appreciate you, and come back for more Tractor Stats.